My husband claimed his affair was actually research to learn new experiences to make our bedroom more exciting, and when I asked why he couldn't have just watched educational videos or read books, he said he needed hands-on experience to be the best partner possible for me, so I decided to take everything in our divorce while his co-worker's husband filed his own lawsuit for alienation of affection. I'm writing this from what used to be our shared home office, except now it's just my office since my soon-to-be ex-husband moved out 3 months ago. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here we are. My name is Jennifer, I'm 35, and until 6 months ago, I thought I was happily married to the most creative excuse maker on the planet. My husband Ryan and I have been together for 11 years, married for 9. We met in college, built a life together, bought a house, and we're even trying to start a family. Ryan works in marketing at a tech company, and I'm a financial analyst at a consulting firm. We had what I thought was a solid relationship with normal ups and downs that every couple faces. About a year ago, I started noticing changes in Ryan's behavior. He was coming home later from work, being secretive with his phone, and showing less interest in spending time together. When I brought up my concerns, he said work had been stressful and he was just trying to focus on getting a promotion. The bedroom side of our relationship had admittedly become somewhat routine after 9 years together, but it wasn't something that bothered me much. We were comfortable with each other, and while it wasn't fireworks every time, it was loving and satisfying. Ryan had never complained or suggested he was unhappy with our intimacy. That all changed 6 months ago when Ryan started suggesting we spice things up. He began trying new techniques and suggesting activities we'd never done before. At first, I was pleasantly surprised by his renewed enthusiasm and assumed he'd been reading articles online or watching educational content. Some of his suggestions were things I'd never heard him express interest in before, but I figured people's preferences can evolve. What struck me as odd was how specific and confident he seemed about these new ideas. When I asked where he'd learned about certain techniques, he'd give vague answers about research or just wanting to be a better partner. I appreciated the effort, but something felt off about how knowledgeable he suddenly seemed about things that had never come up in our 11 years together. 3 months ago, everything came crashing down in the most ridiculous way possible. I was doing laundry and found a receipt in Ryan's pants pocket for a hotel room. When I confronted him about it, he initially tried to claim it was for a work meeting, but the date was on a weekend when he told me he was going hiking with his friend Marcus. I called Marcus to ask about their hiking trip, and he had no idea what I was talking about. That's when I knew Ryan was lying about something significant. When Ryan got home that evening, I presented him with the receipt and told him I'd spoken to Marcus. I expected him to break down and confess to an affair, but what happened instead was so bizarre that I'm still processing it months later. Ryan sat me down and said he had something important to tell me. He said that yes, he had been seeing someone else, but it wasn't what I thought. He claimed that he'd been having an affair with his co-worker Jessica because he wanted to learn new things to bring back to our relationship. I stared at him in disbelief as he explained his reasoning. He said that our bedroom life had become predictable and he wanted to surprise me with new skills and techniques. Instead of suggesting we explore together or seek resources like books or educational content, he had decided that the best way to improve our relationship was to have a 6-month affair with someone else and use her as his practice partner. Ryan actually used the word research multiple times during this conversation. He said Jessica was more experienced than I was, and he'd been learning from her so he could come back and be a better partner to me. He claimed everything he'd been trying with me over the past few months were things he'd researched with Jessica first. When I asked him if he'd lost his mind, Ryan got defensive. He said I should be grateful that he cared enough about our relationship to put in the effort to improve it. He claimed that most men would just get bored and leave, but he was trying to make things better for both of us. I asked him if Jessica knew she was being used as a research project for his marriage. Ryan said that Jessica understood the situation and was happy to help because she was also in a marriage that had become routine. Apparently, she was planning to take what she learned back to her own husband. The audacity of this explanation was breathtaking. Ryan genuinely seemed to believe that he'd found an innovative solution to marital boredom instead of realizing he just had a selfish affair and was trying to justify it with the most absurd reasoning possible. I told Ryan to pack a bag and leave immediately. When he protested and said we should talk about this more, I told him that there was nothing to discuss. He cheated on me for 6 months and then tried to convince me it was for my benefit. I said that if he thought adultery was research, then maybe he needed to research what divorce papers looked like. Ryan left that night, but not before telling me I was being unreasonable and refusing to see how much effort he'd put into improving our relationship. He actually said I was punishing him for trying to be a better husband. Update 1. It's been 6 weeks since Ryan moved out, and his research excuse has somehow gotten even more ridiculous. After our initial confrontation, Ryan spent several days trying to convince me that I was overreacting. He sent me long text messages explaining his reasoning and even suggested that we could incorporate Jessica into our relationship since they developed such good research protocols together. When I didn't respond to his texts, Ryan enlisted his friend Marcus to talk to me. Marcus came over looking incredibly uncomfortable and said that Ryan had asked him to explain why the affair was actually a good thing. Apparently, Ryan had told Marcus that he'd found a creative solution to marital stagnation and that I was being close-minded about it. Marcus, to his credit, told me that he told Ryan he was insane and that there was no way he was going to help him justify cheating. Marcus said he'd never heard such a ridiculous explanation for an affair and that Ryan seemed genuinely convinced that he'd done nothing wrong. That's when I decided I needed more information about what had really been going on. If Ryan was claiming this was all for my benefit, I wanted to know the truth about his relationship with Jessica. I hired a private investigator named Patricia who specializes in infidelity cases. What Patricia discovered was exactly what I suspected, but somehow worse than I'd imagined. She found that Ryan and Jessica had been having an affair for 8 months, not 6 like Ryan had claimed. They'd been meeting regularly at hotels, taking weekend trips together, and even had dinner at several romantic restaurants. More damaging were the text messages Patricia was able to document. Ryan had been telling Jessica that his marriage was dead and that he was only staying with me until he figured out his exit strategy. He told her that I was boring in bed and resistant to trying new things. In one particularly hurtful message, he'd said that being with Jessica had shown him what he'd been missing and that he couldn't imagine going back to his mundane life with me. Jessica, for her part, had been telling Ryan that she was falling in love with him and wanted him to leave me. She'd sent messages saying that her husband was clueless and that she'd never felt as passionate about anyone as she did about Ryan. These were not the messages of two people conducting marital research, they were the messages of two people having a serious emotional and physical affair. The most revealing discovery was a recording Patricia had obtained of Ryan and Jessica at a restaurant where they'd apparently been planning their future together. Ryan was heard saying that he was going to tell me he wanted a divorce but was trying to figure out the best way to protect his assets first. Jessica was heard saying that she was ready to leave her husband and that they should move to another city together to start fresh. Armed with this evidence, I confronted Ryan at the coffee shop where he'd been asking to meet to discuss our future. When I showed him printed copies of the text messages and told him about the recording, his face went white. He tried to claim that those messages were taken out of context and that he'd only said those things to keep Jessica interested so she'd continue helping with his research. When I pointed out that you don't research techniques by telling someone you're going to leave your wife for them, Ryan finally broke down and admitted that things had gotten complicated with Jessica. I told Ryan that I was filing for divorce and that I'd be using his text messages as evidence of adultery. That's when he panicked and started begging me to reconsider. He said that his feelings for Jessica weren't real and that he'd just gotten carried away. He claimed that I was the only person he'd ever truly loved and that Jessica was just a temporary distraction. I told him that if I was so boring and our marriage was so dead, he should be happy that I was setting him free to be with his research partner. Update 2. 2 months have passed since I filed for divorce, and the situation has become a complete disaster for Ryan and Jessica. The fallout from their research project has been swift and brutal. First, Jessica's husband Tom found out about the affair. Apparently, Jessica had been sloppy about hiding evidence, and Tom discovered some of the same text messages my private investigator had found. When Tom confronted Jessica, she initially tried to use Ryan's research excuse, claiming she'd been trying to learn new things to improve their marriage. Tom's response was legendary. He told Jessica that if she wanted to research ways to improve their marriage, she could research divorce attorneys because he was filing immediately. He also said that if she thought adultery was research, she could research what it felt like to be single and supporting herself. Tom reached out to me through my attorney, and we discovered that our soon-to-be ex-spouses had been planning to move in together once their divorces were finalized. Tom was as shocked as I was to learn about the depth of their relationship and their future plans. But here's where it gets even better. Tom lives in a state that still recognizes alienation of affection lawsuits. His attorney filed a claim against Ryan for destroying his marriage and intentionally interfering with his relationship with Jessica. The lawsuit is seeking significant damages, and Ryan's attorney has told him he'll likely have to pay a substantial settlement. Meanwhile, Ryan's employer found out about the affair because Jessica also works there, and their relationship violated the company's policy about workplace relationships. Both Ryan and Jessica received formal reprimands, and Jessica was transferred to a different department. Ryan's chances of getting the promotion he'd been working toward have essentially evaporated. The most satisfying part has been watching Ryan try to navigate the legal and financial consequences of his research. He's had to hire an expensive attorney for both the divorce proceedings and Tom's lawsuit. The text messages and evidence my private investigator gathered have made it impossible for him to claim the affair was anything other than what it was, a serious relationship with someone he planned to leave me for. Ryan has also tried to reconcile with me multiple times, apparently realizing that his research has cost him everything. He sent flowers, letters, and even showed up at my workplace trying to convince me that Jessica meant nothing to him. When I told him that his text messages proved otherwise, he claimed he'd only written those things because he was confused and didn't know what he really wanted. I told him that if he was confused about whether he wanted to be married to me, I was happy to clear up that confusion by finalizing our divorce as quickly as possible. The division of assets has been heavily in my favor thanks to the evidence of his affair and his text messages about planning to leave me. My attorney has argued successfully that Ryan was deliberately concealing assets and planning to abandon the marriage, which has influenced the court's decisions about property division and alimony. Jessica and Ryan's research relationship, meanwhile, has completely fallen apart under the pressure of real-world consequences. According to mutual acquaintances at their workplace, they've been avoiding each other and their romantic dinners have been replaced by heated arguments about who's responsible for the mess they've created. Update 3. 4 months post-separation, and the consequences of Ryan's research continue to multiply in ways that would be funny if they weren't so pathetic. The divorce proceedings have been finalized, and the settlement was even more favorable to me than I'd initially hoped. Ryan ended up having to pay me substantial alimony, give me the house, and cover most of my legal fees. The judge was particularly unimpressed with Ryan's explanation of his affair as marital research and noted in her ruling that adultery committed under the guise of self-improvement was still adultery. Tom's alienation of affection lawsuit against Ryan was settled out of court for a six-figure sum that Ryan had to borrow against his retirement savings to pay. Tom used the settlement money to take a solo vacation to Europe, which he documented extensively on social media with captions about researching what happiness feels like. The workplace situation for Ryan and Jessica has gone from bad to worse. Apparently, their affair became common knowledge in their office, and several colleagues have reported feeling uncomfortable with the situation. Jessica ended up quitting her job because the tension became unbearable, and Ryan is now working in a hostile environment where everyone knows he's the guy who cheated on his wife and claimed it was research. But the most delicious irony came last month when Ryan tried to rekindle his relationship with Jessica, apparently deciding that if he'd lost everything for her, they might as well be together. Jessica rejected him completely, telling him that she'd realized their relationship was based on lies and that she didn't want to be with someone who would betray his wife so callously. According to a mutual friend who works with Ryan, Jessica told him that watching how easily he'd lied to me and justified his betrayal made her realize he'd probably do the same thing to her eventually. She said she was going to focus on rebuilding her life and finding someone who understood the concept of honesty. Ryan was devastated by Jessica's rejection and apparently spent several weeks trying to convince her to give their relationship another chance. When she blocked him on everything, he had what can only be described as a breakdown at work, crying in his cubicle and telling anyone who would listen that he'd lost everything for nothing. His supervisor eventually had to send him home and suggest he seek professional help. Ryan has been seeing a therapist, though according to his friend Marcus, he's still struggling to understand why everyone is treating him like the villain when he was just trying to improve his marriage. Meanwhile, I've been thriving. The house is peaceful, I'm sleeping better than I have in years, and I've started dating someone wonderful who doesn't think adultery is a form of continuing education. His name is David, and when I told him about Ryan's research excuse, his response was, if he wanted to learn new things, there are literally thousands of books and educational resources available. What he wanted was to cheat and feel good about it. The dating world has been surprisingly refreshing after dealing with Ryan's twisted logic for so long. It's amazing how attractive basic honesty and emotional maturity become when you've been married to someone who thinks betrayal is a form of self-improvement. Final update. 8 months after Ryan moved out, I wanted to give a final update on how this bizarre situation has resolved itself. Ryan's research excuse has become something of a local legend, with people in our social circle still talking about it as the most ridiculous justification for cheating they've ever heard. Ryan has been struggling significantly since the divorce was finalized. The financial consequences of his actions, alimony payments to me, the settlement to Tom, legal fees, and having to find a new place to live, have left him in a precarious position. He's had to move back in with his parents at age 36, which apparently has been humbling for someone who thought he was so clever in his approach to marital problems. His parents, who I've always liked, reached out to me to apologize for their son's behavior. His mother told me that she'd never heard such a ridiculous excuse for cheating and that she was embarrassed by how Ryan had handled the situation. She said they'd raised him better than that and couldn't understand how he'd convinced himself that adultery was acceptable under any circumstances. Jessica, meanwhile, has moved to another city entirely to escape the fallout from their affair. Her divorce from Tom was finalized around the same time as mine from Ryan, and she apparently decided she needed a completely fresh start somewhere people didn't know about her research project. The most satisfying development has been Ryan's attempts to get back into the dating world. According to Marcus, who's remained friends with both of us, Ryan has been struggling with online dating because word of his creative excuse has spread through our social networks. Apparently, several women have recognized his name and immediately unmatched with him after hearing about his justification for cheating. One woman apparently went on a first date with Ryan before learning about his history. When she asked him directly about his divorce, Ryan tried to explain his research theory. She reportedly listened to his entire explanation, then told him that if he thought cheating was research, maybe he should research what it felt like to pay for dinner alone, and left him at the restaurant. Ryan has allegedly started telling people that his divorce was due to irreconcilable differences rather than explaining his research methodology, but in a community our size, word travels fast. As for me, David and I have been together for 5 months now, and the relationship is everything my marriage should have been. He's honest, communicative, and when he wants to try something new, he actually talks to me about it instead of conducting research with other people. The best part is that David finds Ryan's excuse as absurd as I do, but he's not cruel about it. When I told him the full story, he said, "I'm sorry you went through that, but I have to admit I'm grateful that his stupidity led you to be available when we met." We've talked about the future, and David has said that if he ever feels like our relationship needs improvement, he'll communicate with me directly rather than consulting with external research partners. It's amazing how revolutionary basic honesty feels after living with someone who thought deception was creativity. I've also become something of an unofficial counselor for friends going through relationship problems. When people complain about their partner's behavior, I remind them that at least their spouses aren't claiming infidelity is continuing education. It's given me a helpful perspective on what constitutes normal relationship challenges versus completely unacceptable behavior. To anyone reading this whose partner has given them a creative excuse for cheating, there is no justification for betrayal that makes it acceptable. If someone wants to improve your relationship, they should work on it with you, not behind your back with someone else. Ryan's research taught me something valuable, though not what he intended. It taught me that I deserve someone who sees me as worthy of honesty and respect, not someone who thinks I'm so naive that I'll believe adultery is self-improvement. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best discoveries about what you're actually worth. Ryan may have thought he was conducting research, but what I learned was that I'm strong enough to leave someone who doesn't value me and smart enough to find someone who does. The irony is that Ryan's affair did teach me new things about relationships, just not the things he intended. I learned about red flags, about trusting my instincts, and about the importance of being with someone whose values align with mine. So in a way, Ryan was right about one thing: his research did improve my relationship situation. It just didn't improve it with him.